Hello, I'm Maria Titizian.
And I'm Rubina Margosian, and this is the Week in Review.
Every week, we bring you the stories shaping Armenia and the region.
From politics and policy to social issues and conflict, we break down the news and what it means for you. This week in the news, leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan meet in Abu Dhabi, where they were honored for efforts aimed at advancing peace. A Baku court delivers final verdicts against former leaders of Artsakh, and the draft text of Armenia's new constitution will be ready in March, but the preamble, one of the most contested elements, will be addressed at a later stage. These stories and more in our weekly roundup of the news. Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev met in Abu Dhabi this week on the sidelines of the Zayed Award for Human Fraternity ceremony, where both leaders were jointly honored for efforts aimed at advancing peace. Pashinyan and Aliyev discussed the implementation of TRIP and other regional infrastructure projects and agreed to maintain direct bilateral contacts. They also welcomed progress on commitments reached earlier at the Washington Peace Summit, stressing the importance of continued dialogue without intermediaries. The two leaders pointed to what they described as tangible benefits of normalization, citing the launch of the limited bilateral trade, Azerbaijan's energy exports to Armenia, and the transit of goods through Azerbaijani territory. They also emphasized the need to expand confidence-building measures and civil society exchanges. Speaking at the ceremony, Pashinyan said the award was a confirmation that the page of conflict is turned. While acknowledging public sensitivities over the legacy of the conflict, he noted that peace is the only consolidation for everyone. Peace is the greatest respect for the victims of the war. A court in Baku has delivered the final verdicts against former leaders and officials of Artsakh, handing down multiple life sentences and long prison terms. Former President Arayik Harutyunyan, former Defense Army Commander Levon Munatsaganian, former Deputy Commander David Manukyan, former Foreign Minister David Babayan, and former National Assembly Speaker David Ishkhanian were sentenced to life imprisonment. Former Presidents Arkady Ghogasian and Baku Saakyan received 20-year sentences. This is because Azerbaijani law bars life sentences for defendants over the age of 65. The military court also announced verdicts for 8 civilian detainees. Melikset Pashayan and Madat Badayan were sentenced to 19 years, Gagik Martirosyan to 18 years, David Alaverdian and Levon Balayan to 16 years, Vasily Beklarian, Gurgen Stepanyan and Eric Khazarian to 15 years of imprisonment. Azerbaijan accuses the Armenian detainees of terrorism, war crimes, and genocide. Ruben Vartanyan's case has been separated from the others and is continuing. And the National Assembly of France has unanimously adopted a resolution calling for the release of Armenian prisoners held in Azerbaijan, with 183 votes in favor and none against. The resolution reinstates support for Armenians displaced from Nagorno-Karabakh, calls for guarantees of their safe return, condemns the imprisonment and trials of former Artsakh political leaders, and urges the French government to press Azerbaijan for the immediate and unconditional release of Armenian detainees. The resolution is a political statement and it is non-binding. In the meanwhile, Aram I, Catholicos of the Great House of Kilikia, has sent a letter to the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance calling for the U.S. Vice President's personal intervention to secure the release of imprisoned former Artsakh officials and Armenian prisoners of war and to ensure the protection of Artsakh's spiritual and cultural heritage. The letter comes ahead of the U.S. Vice President's planned visits to Armenia and Azerbaijan next week. And a team from the U.S. engineering consulting firm AECOM visited Armenia this week to begin works on a survey for the TRIP site. The U.S. Embassy in Yerevan said AECOM is to provide technical assessments and recommendations on rail and other infrastructure development. Meanwhile, Armenia's Minister of Territorial Administration and Infrastructure, David Khudatian, said this week that synchronizing Armenia's electricity grid with all 4 neighboring countries is technically feasible with no major obstacles identified. Speaking at a press conference, he said closer grid integration would bring commercial benefits through electricity trade and improve overall system stability. During a recent visit to Turkey, officials confirmed the project's technical viability, although timelines and final solutions are still under discussion. Armenia's grid is already interconnected with Iran, but full synchronization is pending, with construction of a key transmission line about 85% complete. Work is also advancing on the Armenia-Georgia line, with international contractors expected to begin construction this year. Khudatian also addressed nuclear energy plans, saying Armenia has received proposals for modular nuclear reactors from Russia, the United States, France, China, and South Korea, with a final decision expected to be made in 2026 or 2027. The government has extended the operating life of the existing Metsamor nuclear power plant until 2036, while Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has indicated plans to launch a modular facility starting that year to ensure long-term energy security. Meanwhile, the European Union and Armenia have reaffirmed the strategic ambition of their partnership and a shared commitment to advance cooperation and alignment in foreign security and defense policy. During the third high-level EU-Armenia political and security dialogue held this week in Yerevan, the EU welcomed Armenia's steadily increasing alignment with the bloc's common foreign and security policy positions and encouraged further progress. On the other hand, Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov again warned Armenia against deepening ties with the West at the expense of its traditional allies. During talks in Moscow with Parliament Speaker Alen Simonian, Lavrov said Russia remains Armenia's main trade and economic partner and reiterated Moscow's readiness to further develop bilateral relations. He once again stated that membership in the Eurasian Economic Union is incompatible with European Union accession, but described the choice as Armenia's sovereign decision. He also rejected what he called exaggerated claims that Russia poses a security threat to Armenia. So now, in general, we've heard this sentiment that European Union and the Eurasian Economic Union are not compatible from several Russian officials. However, this has been coming from Lavrov himself in the last weeks. That's why we thought it was worth a mention. In response to Lavrov, Parliament Speaker Alen Simonian said that Yerevan has no intention of leaving the Eurasian Economic Union and does not seek to act against Russia, which he described as a friendly and allied state. At the same time, he noted that Armenia still has unresolved concerns regarding the Collective Security Treaty Organization and expressed unease over what he described was increasingly sharp public rhetoric from Russian officials. And during a separate meeting with his Russian counterpart, Valentina Matvienko, Simonian asserted that as a sovereign state, Armenia has the right to pursue a balanced foreign policy and is not going to take anyone's side or act against anyone. The two discussed a wide range of issues, both political and economic, as well as educational and cultural, with particular emphasis on the development of interparliamentary cooperation. They also discussed the problems that have arisen for Armenian drivers carrying cargo transportation to Russia as a result of a recent Russian immigration regulation change. And speaking of increasingly sharp public rhetoric from Russian officials, Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexei Uverchuk also commented on Armenia's deepening ties with the European Union, warning that the bloc is shifting from an economic union towards a military political one. The Russian official posed a direct question: are Armenians ready to join a military political union that is currently disposed very aggressively towards Russia? The Chief of Defense Staff of the Indian Armed Forces visited Armenia this week for a series of high-level meetings. General Anil Chauhan was in Armenia on a 4-day visit. India's defense staff said the visit marked an important step in advancing shared strategic interests and strengthening long-term defense and security cooperation. Chauhan met with Defense Minister Suren Babikyan and Prime Minister Pashinyan. With his Armenian counterpart, Edvard Asaryan, he discussed joint training exercises and professional exchanges. The Indian side said the meetings reflected a shared commitment to deepening strategic partnership and developing mutual capabilities. The general also met with High-Tech Industry Minister Mkhitar Harapetyan to discuss defense industry cooperation and potential joint research and development projects. India has emerged as Armenia's largest arms supplier in recent years. Since 2022, Yerevan has primarily purchased artillery and air defense systems from New Delhi. Indian media reported in mid-January that guided missiles for Pinaka Some multiple launcher rocket systems were also exported to Armenia. And Justice Minister Surpi Galyan said this week that the draft text for Armenia's new constitution will be ready in March and will be made public. Speaking to reporters, Galyan said the preamble, one of the most contested elements of the reform, has not yet been discussed and will be addressed at a later stage. The current preamble references Armenia's 1990 Declaration of Independence, which in turn cites a 1989 decision on the unification of Soviet Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. Prime Minister Pashinyan has argued that constitutional changes are needed to reflect new political realities, while critics say the process is being driven by external pressure from Azerbaijan. Baku has repeatedly said that a constitutional amendment is needed for the removal of what it calls territorial claims as a precondition for finalizing a peace agreement. And Defense Minister Sulem Papikan has moved to end the direct role of church-appointed clergy in the armed forces. The ministry will continue providing spiritual services in the ministry, but chaplains will now be appointed by the armed forces rather than by the church. The decree specifies that clergy of the Armenian Apostolic Church conscripted for mandatory service may be appointed as chaplains or senior chaplains after completing training and upon recommendation from their unit commanders. The defense minister also ordered that general staff submit proposals for creating non-combat officer chaplain ranks of captain and major with formal spiritual education from the Armenian Church listed as a required qualification. The Church has maintained an official chaplaincy presence in the military since 1997 that has ended this week. And ahead of the Episcopal Assembly of the Armenian Apostolic Church set to take place in Austria, the investigative committee has brought criminal charges against 6 bishops and barred them from leaving the country pending investigation. The case is connected to Catholicos Garegin II's January 27 decision to defrock Bishop Gevorg Saroyan, who had challenged the decision in court, and a district court had ordered his temporary reinstatement while the lawsuit is under review. Now, the Catholicos defrocked Saroyan despite the court order. The investigative committee now has opened a criminal case charging the 6 bishops, members of the Supreme Council, along with another priest, with obstructing the execution of a judicial act. In a statement, the Mother See condemned what it described as a state interference in church affairs and said the indictments and travel bans are aimed at disturbing the upcoming council. And Human Rights Watch says Armenia's human rights record remained uneven over the past year, according to its 2026 World Report. The organization notes that while the authorities continued anti-corruption efforts and rule of law reforms, a range of serious concerns persist. Those include expanding state surveillance powers, restrictions on media freedom, domestic violence, discrimination against persons with disability, as well as violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. The Human Rights Watchdog also referenced ineffective investigations into alleged police abuse, limited judicial independence, and the excessive use of pretrial detention in criminal cases. Armenia, the report notes, still lacks comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation. The report also highlights ongoing social challenges following the displacement of more than 100,000 ethnic Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh. As the government began phasing out rent subsidies, introduced targeted assistance programs for children, older people, certain persons with disabilities, students, and families that had lost a primary breadwinner. But the Human Rights Watch says the shift has left many displaced people struggling to cover rent and meet basic living expenses. And an example of police violence, a police officer has been placed under 2 months house arrest on suspicion of assaulting a citizen at a police station. Officer Haik Hakopian is seen in a video circulated online swearing and forcefully slapping a man. According to reports, Hakopian allegedly used violence against the father of a suspect in an attempt to force the son to appear at the station. The incident is reported to have occurred 4 months ago. However, a video of the incident has emerged recently. And a case from several years ago, former Armenian Culture Minister Hasmik Bogosyan has been sentenced to 4.5 years in prison, but will not serve the time after an amnesty was applied. Armenia's anti-corruption criminal court found Bogosyan guilty of abuse of office and aiding large-scale fraud. Prosecutors said the curse stemmed from allegations that Bogosyan, who served as culture minister from 2012 until 2016, used her position to assist the illegal appropriation of 300 square meters section of land located in a public music school in Yerevan. She was also involved in a separate legal appropriation case involving a landmark downtown Yerevan building known as the AUX building. Despite the conviction, the court applied a 2018 nationwide amnesty law tied to national anniversaries, releasing Bogosyan from serving her sentence. And new criminal proceedings have been launched against the company Multi-Leon, which operates natural gas filling stations, for allegedly illegally using several municipal properties in Yerevan for nearly 16 years. The Prosecutor General's office has also asked the Yerevan municipality to halt the unauthorized use of the properties and consider liability measures related to unlicensed gas sale. The land plots were originally leased to the company in the early 2000s. In 2010, the Yerevan municipality terminated the lease agreement and declared the buildings and the land city property. Prosecutors say the properties were never actually returned to municipal control, and the company continued to operate on the sites without legal grounds. The investigation also found that Multi-Leon allegedly used areas significantly larger than those originally allocated and operated compressed gas filling stations without the required permits while paying rent based on the smaller expired licenses. Until 2023, the company was jointly owned by the son of former President Robert Kocharian and members of the Tsarukyan family, each holding 50% stake. Since May of 2023, ownership has been listed under Bartsrung Group, according to the public registry data. And Armenia's Prosecutor General's office says demolition work is continuing on illegally constructed properties along the shores of Lake Sevan, including parts of a lakeside mansion built by former police chief Vladimir Gasparian. This week, fences, retaining walls and ramps and other structures located below the permitted elevation level at the property were dismantled. Prosecutors are also seeking confiscation of the mansion as property of alleged illicit origin. Since December of 2025, authorities say about 40 illegal primary and auxiliary structures on 14 lakeside land plots have been demolished following motions by prosecutors, with the campaign expected to continue into 2026. Additional submissions have been sent to the Environment Ministry and the Lake Sevan Park Administration. The measures and related lawsuits concern several high-profile properties, including the Artsakh hotel complex and cottages in Sevan, as well as lakeside mansions linked to former Football Federation president, a former parliament member Ruben Hayrapetyan, former defense minister Seyran Ohanyan, and businessman Armen Hakobjanyan. Prosecutors say criminal proceedings have also been initiated based on findings from the investigations. And in our relatively new section, the Election Digest, with no major election announcements this week, our Elections Digest focuses on the TRIP project, a topic that has been central to the political debate in Armenia, especially now ahead of U.S. Vice President DJ Vance's visit to Armenia. So what we've done is we've looked back at major candidates' positions on TRIP. Narek Karapetyan, the de facto leader of the In Our Way movement, has stated that they would not restart negotiations from scratch, but rather improve the existing framework. He argued that the project and Armenia in general need several guarantors. Proceeding without international guarantees, he had insisted TRIP and the peace process are fraught with risks for Armenia. He suggested that the route and the Sunni region in general should be protected by a consensus of global powers to ensure Armenia's territorial integrity. Former President Robert Kocharian and the leader of the parliamentary opposition Armenia Alliance sharply criticized TRIP, warning that it primarily serves the interest of Azerbaijan and Turkey. He called the project Armenia's biggest security threat. According to Kocharian, Washington's primary motivation is gaining control over Iran's northern border. He also highlighted Israel's role, noting that U.S. policy in the region is heavily influenced by Israeli interests. Another former president, Serge Sarkisian, who heads the Republican Party, expressed skepticism and confusion about TRIP. He criticized the inconsistencies of official statements, pointing out that the government's position often changes rapidly. When asked if he sees risks associated with the project, Sarkisian replied that he would only form an opinion after reviewing the actual document and its status. He acknowledged that economic relations could contribute to some degree of peace, but emphasized that they can never serve as a true guarantee of peace. Levon Zurabian, who is the candidate for prime minister from First President Levon Ter-Petrosyan's Armenian National Congress Party, is likewise critical of TRIP. In a recent interview, he qualified it as a badly negotiated deal. He argues that while sovereignty is mentioned multiple times in the framework, it is clear from the details that sovereignty has been taken away from Armenia. He also argues that because of TRIP, the U.S. will block any railway connecting Armenia's economy with Iran. Former human rights ombudsman Arman Tatoyan, who is the candidate from the newly formed Wings of Unity Party, in an op-ed published in the Washington Post back in late December, wrote that the Washington Accords and TRIP seem to have put off Baku's plans to seize all of Syunik province. However, he noted that it leaves the occupation of sovereign Armenian territory in place. And one more former official, and that's the end of this section. Former Yerevan Mayor Haik Marutian, a former ally of Pashinyan, welcomed the Washington Accords in August as a favorable solution for Armenia. He wrote, at least in the medium term, it gives us the opportunity to avoid a new war and pursue economic development. And this was an official declaration by his party. And that's all for this week as far as the news goes, but we still have a segment where we talk about what we published this week. It was mostly salt, our lifestyle section. So from salt this time, it spilled over to from month to month and also from week to week. We have an interesting photo story in salt this week by Ani Gevorkian, When Bach Meets Naregatsi, the Armenian viola. Through photos, she traces the creation of the Armenian viola through the work of Grigor Arakelian, an instrument that bridges Bach and Naregatsi tradition and innovation and seeks to reshape Armenia's musical landscape by reconnecting it with the medieval roots. Grigor Arakelian is an interesting musician, and he has co-created this what he calls the Armenian viola that looks somehow like a cello, and he imagines that it is a missing link in Armenian medieval music and will be able to help us understand the sounds that were originally meant. Well, The Last Drive is a very interesting half fiction, half narration, based in truth piece by Elakanakerian Berberian. And it's about a late-night conversation that spirals into a haunting taxi ride where sexuality, inherited trauma, and unspoken identities collide, blending memory and fiction. Ella, in her own style, explores desire, fear, and the fragile moments when intimacy and danger unexpectedly meet. And this typically often happens in taxis. And Puzzle Spheres and Play, Armenia's quest room scene. It's a piece by Elisa Barkhudarian. She says, step into Armenia's quest room scene where puzzles, performance, and fear collide. From intellectual story-driven games to high adrenaline horror experiences, explore how local creators are shaping immersive entertainment and why players keep choosing to escape. So yes, as I didn't know, we have several escape rooms in Armenia, quest rooms with actors and their own kind of, favorite themes, and Lisa has explored that for us. In other articles, recently published piece by Tikran Yegavian, From Smyrna to Stepanakert, How National Defeats Reshaped States. This is in the opinion section, focusing on legitimacy, refugees, national memory, and whether trauma becomes paralysis or a catalyst for reinvention, Dikran Yegabian presents a comprehensive analysis of how catastrophic defeat reshaped states, examining Greece after the 1922 Asya Minor catastrophe and Armenia after the loss of Artsakh. In a piece we published today, it's called Geometry of Power from the Louvre to Yerevan. It's by Herine Pilosian. She is a first-time contributor to EVN Report. And it's a very interesting essay. It's tracing how power reshapes cities. Her essay moves from Paris to Yerevan. It also moves from Soviet to early decades of Armenian independence to the current situation, revealing striking similarities beneath shifting ideologies. And that's all for this week. Thank you for joining us, and we will be back again next week.